The mathematics were beautiful in their calculated lethality. A tumen of 10,000 warriors could lose 60,000 arrows per minute. At Carolyn River, they'd fired 1.8 million arrows in the first half hour alone. The Naimans had died in precisely calculated waves. Shishia became the first foreign target, a test run for the world conquest about to begin. The Tangut Kingdom controlled critical Silk Road choke points and had played steppe politics for centuries, manipulating tribes against each other. They were about to learn that the game had new rules written in their own blood. But conquering steppe tribes was mere preparation compared to what came next. The Mongols were about to face Chinese walls that had stood for 1,000 years, defended by millions. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China with 2 million soldiers behind fortifications that had turned back every barbarian invasion for centuries. The numbers suggested comedy, not conquest, 100,000 Mongols against 2 million defenders. At Badger's Mouth Pass, mathematics replaced traditional muscle. The Jin sent 500,000 troops through the narrow valley, confident that overwhelming numbers meant inevitable victory. But Mongol engineers, former Jin engineers who'd switched sides, had calculated angles of fire, identified kill zones, planned retreat paths. In 2 days of systematic slaughter, 30,000 Mongols eliminated 500,000 enemies. Bodies piled so high they literally formed new walls that had to be climbed. This next development changed warfare forever across all of Asia. Chinese defectors brought the Mongols not just engineering knowledge, but gunpowder, not for fireworks or celebratory signals, but for pure psychological annihilation. Thunder and fire seemed to prove that the sky gods themselves fought for Genghis Khan. Beijing fell after Jin troops realized a terrible truth about their situation. Their own generals feared the emperor's punishment for failure more than they feared the Mongols. Defenders defected en masse, opening gates from inside. When the city finally fell after prolonged siege, Genghis Khan ordered total extermination of the population, except for engineers, craftsmen, and scholars. The Mongols were learning civilization by methodically consuming it piece by piece. The casualty numbers stagger belief and comprehension. 9 million dead across northern China in just 5 years. Entire provinces completely depopulated, their agricultural land returning to grassland paradise for nomads. But Genghis had learned something during those frozen childhood winters that no emperor raised in palaces could understand. You could rule graveyards as easily as you ruled cities, and graveyards didn't rebel. Here's where our story transforms from conquest into apocalypse that rewrote demographics. The Khwarezm Empire stretched from Persia through Central Asia to India's borders. 400,000 professional soldiers defended ancient cities whose walls had stood for millennia. Their fatal mistake came wrapped in silk and driven by greed that would cost millions of lives. Governor Inalchuk of Otrar saw 450 Mongol traders arriving with valuable goods and thought he'd found easy profit. He murdered every single trader, stole all their merchandise. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to the Khwarezm Shah demanding justice and compensation, the Shah had them beheaded. One survived, his head shaved in ritual humiliation, sent back to carry the message. What happened next sounds like impossible fantasy, but we have detailed Persian records written by terrified witnesses. Genghis Khan climbed a sacred mountain alone, removed his hat in respect to Tengri, and prayed for 3 days without food or water. When he descended with eyes that had seen beyond this world, he spoke words that would echo through history. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. The force comparison seemed overwhelmingly favorable to Khwarezm's survival. 400,000 defenders versus 200,000 Mongols across thousands of miles. But the Shah had never faced an enemy who fought in coordinated systems rather than individual battles. Genghis divided his forces, unthinkable in traditional warfare where concentration meant strength. Multiple armies struck simultaneously across thousands of miles of territory. Cities expecting reinforcement found only more Mongol tumens arriving. The Shah's forces couldn't concentrate anywhere without exposing other cities to attack. They were being systematically dismantled like a complex machine taken apart piece by piece. Otrar fell first after brutal siege. Governor Inalchuk, who'd started this cascade of horror through his greed, had molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, a fortune becoming exquisite torture. But this was mercy compared to what followed at other cities. At Bukhara, one of Islam's holiest cities, Genghis Khan rode his horse directly into the main mosque in deliberate sacrilege. Priceless books became feed for horses. He gathered the city's leaders and delivered a speech that scribes preserved in trembling detail. "Your sins must be great indeed, for God to send me as punishment. I am his scourge upon the earth. Obey my commands and live as my slaves. Resist and cease to exist entirely." The city obeyed every command without resistance. 1.75 million people died anyway, not from rage or battle fury, but from cold calculation. Terror was a precision tool carefully applied. Other cities hearing Bukhara's fate would surrender immediately without costly siege. In Genghis Khan's mathematical logic, killing one city completely saved the lives of Mongol soldiers who would have died attacking 10 cities. Samarkand, jewel of Central Asia and crown of the Silk Road, lasted exactly 3 days before falling. Persian historians describe pyramids constructed from severed heads, carefully sorted by gender and age bookkeeping of brutality. The Mongols had transformed mass killing into efficient administration. But then the Khwarezm Shah made his final, fatal mistake. He fled, rather than face the consequences of his actions. Genghis sent generals Jebe and Subutai with 20,000 riders on history's longest pursuit, chasing him across deserts, through mountains, across the Caspian Sea, where he died on a barren island, possibly of dysentery, certainly of despair. Merv's extinction remains history's single bloodiest day, carefully documented by survivors. Each Mongol warrior received a quota, 300 to 400 executions per man. They worked in organized shifts like laborers. The systematic killing took 13 days of continuous work. When Persian scholars returned years later to document the catastrophe, they counted skulls methodically. 1.75 million human beings murdered. The ancient irrigation system maintained for millennia was deliberately destroyed. The desert reclaimed what had been fertile civilization. 15 million dead in just 2 years across the Khwarezm Empire. The Mongols had killed more people than existed in many entire countries. This transcended war. It was erasure of civilizations from existence. Subutai's reconnaissance force reached Europe, defeating everything in its path. At the Kalka River, European knights in their finest armor met Mongol mobility and discipline, dying in droves without understanding what killed them. But then Urgedai Khan died drunk in his distant palace. The Mongols withdrew for succession selection according to ancient law, and Europe drew breath it hadn't earned and didn't deserve. Medieval European maps began labeling the eastern steppes. Here lie the demons of Tartarus. They weren't entirely wrong in their terror. In 1227, the aging Khan returned to Mongolia, but unfinished business pulled him back to the steppes. Shisha had foolishly rebelled during his absence. During this final campaign, death finally caught the man who'd seemed uncatchable. Accounts differ wildly. Fall from horse during hunting, arrow wound during siege, a captured princess's poison needle hidden in her bed. The end result was the same mortality claimed even the world conqueror. As Genghis Khan lay dying, he gave one final order so terrible that the men who heard it would take the secret to their graves literally, as events proved. The funeral procession returning his body to Mongolia became a march of systematic death. Every living thing encountered along the route was killed. Humans, animals, everything. "Go serve your Khan in the next world," executioners told victims before the blade fell. The burial itself was a masterwork of paranoid secrecy. 40 maidens were sacrificed at the tomb to serve him in death. The 1,000 soldiers who dug the grave were killed by another unit. That second unit was itself eliminated by a third. A river was diverted over the burial site to hide it forever. Thousands of horses trampled the ground until no trace remained visible. The location would die with its creators, hidden until the end of time. The empire immediately convulsed with succession struggles. Urgedai, the designated heir, faced challenges from ambitious brothers. But Genghis had built systems better than he knew. The decimal military structure held firm. The Yasa law code continued governing. Most remarkably, the religious tolerance law remained enforced. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, shamans, all protected equally under Mongol rule, regardless of faith. The statistical aftermath staggers human comprehension even today. 40 million dead, roughly 11% of the entire world's population, 12 million square miles under direct Mongol control, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. But constructive statistics mattered too, though they're rarely mentioned. The Silk Road, protected by Mongol law and patrols, became history's safest trade route for the first time. The first international postal system, the YAM network, connected Dublin to Beijing, carrying messages across continents. Technologies flowed freely for the first time in history. Gunpowder traveling west, printing moving east, navigation knowledge spreading everywhere. The Mongol peace, enforced through terror, but real in its effects, created the first truly global economy. A European merchant could travel to China with a single passport, protected by the Khan's word that transcended all borders. Trade flourished where blood had flowed. But hidden in this unprecedented success was catastrophe that would kill millions more. The same protected roads that carried silk and spices also carried disease-bearing fleas. The Black Death, originating in Mongol territories, would travel their trade routes to kill 1/3 of Europe's population. Genghis Khan's final posthumous campaign claimed victims for centuries after his death. The genetic legacy proves more enduring than any monument of stone. Y chromosome studies confirm the statistically impossible. 16 million living men descend directly from one 13th century individual. No emperor, prophet, or philosopher has impacted human DNA like this illiterate nomad who reshaped the species itself. The historical debate still rages with passion 8 centuries later. Monster or unifier? Hitler and Stalin studied his techniques of mass terror and deemed them too extreme. History's greatest villains calling history's greatest conqueror excessive in his methods. Yet he established international law, protected religious freedom, and created meritocracy centuries before European Enlightenment. The starving orphan eating wild onions got his revenge on a cosmic scale. Not just against the enemies who'd wronged him, but against death itself. Genghis Khan achieved the only immortality that truly matters, living forever in humanity's blood, in our trade networks, in our nightmares, and in our DNA itself. 8 centuries later, we live in the world his sword carved from chaos. The Mongol peace ended long ago, but globalization, his true legacy, defines our modern age completely. The wolf of the steppes sleeps now in an unmarked grave that will likely never be found. But when 16 million men look in the mirror today, Genghis Khan's eyes look back at them. His territorial empire crumbled within generations. His genetic empire expands with every birth. If this story of how one orphan's rage literally reshaped human civilization and DNA itself fascinated you, subscribe to Flow of History. We bring you the conquerors, the campaigns, the moments where individual will alter the trajectory of entire species. Hit subscribe now, because the next story of impossible conquest and world-changing violence is coming soon. And trust me, you won't want to miss how one person's determination can transform everything.